Andor and Tales of the Jedi have been the two major Star Wars releases as we come to the end of 2022. The shows both have major upside, but also things that make you question how they were even allowed to be in the show. So with that, there are many pros and cons of each show that make it enticing to put the shows against each other, and see which show comes out as the better show. The categories that will be used to judge each show will be writing, action, story, and how the show overall adds to the Star Wars canon. These categories will apply to both live action and animation, so we can fairly judge each show. If you want more Star Wars content rated against other Star Wars content, subscribe and let me know in the comments. If you want more Star Wars content, check out this Star Wars Discover channel, but not until you finish the video. Andor has a clean show of writing, which differs from most of Star Wars projects, mostly because how the show stays consistent, as the show is based on one idea, one vision, and that's the vision of Tony Gilroy. However, Tales of the Jedi holds the same strength, as it's also the project of Dave Filoni, who in his career has been pretty hit or miss on projects. However, recently, his Star Wars ideas have been very sound that carries over to the Tales of the Jedi show, and how it seems to be one vision. There are negatives for both shows, even with the consistency. There are some head-scratching moments through both. Through Andor's later episodes, everything was set in stone. The show had found its identity and knew what type of show it wanted to be. Though it must be mentioned that the first 4 episodes were jumping around and didn't seem to be consistent with the rest of the show, as each episode seemed to act as its own thing, and the show at that point didn't know what it wanted to be. But because of the major recovery it had, episode 5 and on, the writing was still very well good because it found its consistency. Tales of the Jedi didn't really struggle with finding its identity and getting to the point, mostly because of how short the show was and there weren't many areas for the show to slip up on, as it was quick and got to the point of exactly what kind of episode it wanted to be. Episode 1 was an odd and even bad episode. The visuals were great, except everything in the first episode seemed pointless. The only reason many people accepted the first episode is because people supposed it would have some bearing on the future of the show. It did not. It did not serve a purpose whatsoever, and it was easily forgotten when thinking about Tales of the Jedi. Because there were only 6 short episodes and there was a massive misstep such as the first one, it kind of ruins the overall consistency of the show. And while it's easy just to pretend that that episode did not exist and skip past it and move on to the others, I can't, because I'm putting the two shows up against each other, and for that reason, I would have to give the writing victory to Andor. Tales of the Jedi writing is great, but Andor does have the edge. Action is highly important for every show, as it adds to the excitement of each show and how it builds off the story and gives something amazing for the eyes to look at. Andor's action is somehow not a thing. Pure action sequences are hard to come by, which is surprising because of how every episode is 45 minutes long. When we do see action, it's nothing worthy of praise, simply because it doesn't have many Star Wars elements to it. Action without lightsabers is certainly not unheard of in the Star Wars realm, and it's 100% possible to make a great action without lightsabers. However, lightsaber battles have a different feel to them. Tales of the Jedi has a remarkable amount of action for such a short show. The action doesn't feel overdone, and it fits the story well. However, the lightsaber battle between Dooku and Yaddle isn't very much to speak on. With that episode being my favorite, it's hard to say that the action is bad, but comparing it to another animated action sequence such as Darth Maul vs. Ahsoka, the Tales of the Jedi show barely holds its own. Luckily for the Tales of the Jedi, I am not comparing it to the Clone Wars, therefore compared to Andor, Tales of the Jedi is the winner for action. Story is the most important part of any type of movie or show. Action means nothing without story, because if you just get an action mess without a quality story, no matter how good the action is, the piece of content would be bad. Star Wars clearly doesn't need any more of that, so it's crucial that these two stories nailed story. So Andor's story was the best part of the show. Because Andor had small amounts of action, the story needed to be good. The story was. The two major arcs of the show were the heist and the prison break. Both of these were really good. The story fit perfectly and it was told wonderfully, and there's not much more for me to complain about. The prison break episode was the best of the show, and it felt so refreshing. However, the missteps in the story were when Andor was looking for his sister, as this was the original plot. However, he just stopped looking for her. Near the end of the show, Andor's mom tells him to stop looking for her, but that's a poor excuse, as he just stopped caring about her after episode 1. All that aside, the story of Andor was very good. The story of the Tales of the Jedi is quick, just like the show. However, the story bounces around characters and keeping everything refreshing and the audience from getting bored. That's something Andor didn't do well. Tales jumped around to keep things exciting, while Andor was just trying to tell a story and not really caring about how to keep the audience excited. Though for just an hour of content, the story of Tales of the Jedi was really good and fit the Star Wars canon really well.
Qui-Gon Jinn has become one with the Force. It is time to let him go.
And you can do this?
What choice have I?
Though just because the show was so short, the story could not really be fleshed out enough, and for that reason I'm going to have to give the victory of story to Andor. Now, the last topic, and the most opinion-oriented one, as in this topic I'm going to discuss which show added more value to the overall canon. Andor was an interesting show. Andor was very well received. Andor was refreshing and added a new tone to the Star Wars canon. Though when thinking about each character in Andor, I have to think if the show made an overall large improvement to the characters and Star Wars canon. The Andor show did add depth to the Empire, however the show constantly undercut and made things that we thought were important about the Empire just less important. Instead, the show introduced new elements of the Empire to the Star Wars canon. I do not believe these new elements to the Star Wars canon provide a significant difference to how I view Star Wars. Now, for a character such as Andor, we learned a lot more about his life and his struggles, but I don't look at him as a new character or any differently than I previously did. Andor, while being refreshing and had an overall pretty good show, it did miss the mark on many Star Wars elements. There were little to no aliens in Andor, which was very surprising. Contrary to Rogue One, in Andor no one cared about the Force, and no one used the Force's belief to keep them going. Rather, each character seemed to know little to nothing about the Force, about Jedi, about Darth Vader, and about anything of the former Republic. This is surprising considering the Republic and all the Jedi were just around 15 years before this time period in Star Wars. This can make the audience feel as if the story of Andor wants to be its own thing and doesn't really care about the universe around it. This thought is constantly rejected because people think this is just all part of the story. That doesn't really give any reassurance considering the creator of Andor doesn't even like Star Wars. This is a major contrast to Dave Filoni, the creator of Tales of the Jedi, who wholeheartedly loves and cares about Star Wars. Dave Filoni is the closest thing we will ever get to George Lucas, and he cares about the characters and the story of Star Wars. This leads me to understanding that every single character in the Tales of the Jedi that was already in some other type of Star Wars content was improved upon and added necessary depth to their character. So, with all of this, I can say that the 6-episode limited series that popped out of nowhere is better than the highly anticipated 12-episode, $135 million show of Andor. That's just one person's opinion, and I would love to hear yours in the comments below. If you've made it this far, subscribe. Remember that the Force is with you, always.